Craig R. Smith is chairman of Swiss America Trading Corporation, a national investment firm specializing in U.S. gold and silver coins. He founded the company in 1982 out of a bedroom in his home with an initial capital and investment of, wait for it, $50. And you think that opportunity no longer exists, huh? Since then, the company has grown into one of the largest precious metal firms in the industry. Craig is the author of Crashing the Dollar, How to Survive a Global Currency Collapse, Rediscovering Gold in the 21st Century, The Complete Guide to the Next Gold Rush, and Black Gold Stranglehold, The Myth of Scarcity and the Politics of Oil. Let's welcome to the Global Freedom Report, Craig R. Smith. Hi, Craig. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Brent. It's good to be with you.
In your bio, it says you have always had a deep concern for the well-being of American families. Now, when you look at life in the United States today, and I know this is a little bit off point in terms of the economics, but just in general, how would you characterize that concern? What do you see as the current state of the American family?
Well, I think it's under a lot of pressure, Brent, and it's coming from all areas, whether it be media or finance or even spiritually. It seems to be that the fabric that's held our society together revolves around the family, and yet the family seems to be being demeaned in every sense of the word, and that's why we're very, very concerned about what we see happening in America. And, of course, we focus primarily on the financial aspect, but it's all over the place. I mean, my wife and I were just talking about it today at breakfast, that you can't watch a national television show anymore and not see some type of either homosexual bent to a program, or the father's a dum-dum, or the kids are running crazy, ripshot over the parents. It's just not the way that this country was ever envisioned by our founding fathers, and I hope we can turn things around before it's too late.
As do I, as do our listeners, and we sure do. And the truth of the matter is, I absolutely 100% I'm of the conviction that we can turn things around. The question for me is whether we will turn things around. That's
a good point. There's no doubt about it. I think you're right. We can turn it around. I think it's important that we all get engaged. That's why programs like this that will educate, discuss, and provoke people to thinking. You know, we've kind of really bulked ourselves up on the amusement side of life, where we want to amuse ourselves, which means to stop thinking versus musing and actually taking time to think things through. So hopefully, with enough education, a different future awaits us.
There we go. That's it. We now need musement instead of amusement. Very good. I like that distinction. All right, let me start by asking you today's question of the day. This is a question I've asked all the listeners as well. Do you think the United States is currently in a depression? Now, when I ask the question, I mean, this is regardless of the official standards for measuring depressions and recessions and that kind of stuff. What do you think?
I've been saying we've been in a depression since 2009. And by the way, I have to apologize, Brent. I'm in the San Diego harbor right next to the Marine base, so we're not under attack here. If you hear incoming helicopters, it's only because they're running exercises outside.
Oh, okay. Great. No, that goes well on live radio.
There you go. Well, yes, I believe we've been into depression, and as I've written about extensively, it's just a little bit different than what we experienced in 1929. Keep in mind, a depression by definition, Brent, is 24 consecutive months of negative growth. And if you were to back out the $2.6 trillion that's been spent by the Federal Reserve and our federal government trying to turn things around since 2008, I could argue that we have had 26 consecutive months of negative growth. But we don't see it like we saw in the Great Depression. In the Great Depression, you had men standing in front of factories looking for work. Well, today they get 99 weeks' worth of unemployment checks in the mail. We see people standing in bread lines to get food to take home to their families. Today, we have 44 million Americans on food stamps. We send it to them in the mail. Back during the Great Depression, banks would foreclose and padlock your home and put your possessions in the front yard. Today, banks have forestalled foreclosures and allow people to live a year to 2 years in their home without paying a mortgage.
You talked about 24 months of negative statistics. Of course, the problem is that statistics get massaged all the time. You know, they tell us inflation's not as bad because they've taken out energy and food costs and things like that. And then they come back with their official statistics. So when you take a look at it, how bad is the U.S. economy really? They say it's 9.1 unemployment. They say inflation is this or that. How bad is it really?
Well, it depends upon whose stats you use. If you use the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's quite a bit different than the real world. But let me clarify something, Brent. Earlier when I said that we've had 26 months of negative growth, the reports have we've had positive growth, but we've had negative growth if you take out the $2.6 trillion that we've placed into the system. Again, if you look at putting that money into the system, then clearly we've had growth. You had certain quarters that were 3%, 1.8%, but at what cost?
But wait, now hang on. If you're talking about money that comes from the Fed, which ultimately comes from the American taxpayer. So essentially,
sure,
they took the money from the Americans to put into the economy. That's not creating anything new for the economy.
Well, that's absolutely correct. And that's why I actually did a study, and then they've been done in Switzerland too, where if you go back to 1971 in America, we had a $1 trillion a year economy. Today we have a $14 trillion economy. Back then you had $9 billion worth of debt. Today you have $59 billion. Well, if you back if you back the 50 trillion out, we've had 40 years of negative growth in this nation, and that's the point that people have to come to. That's why my new book that'll be out next week called The Inflation Deception is all about how we're being deceived to believe that things are better when we all know that they're not. For example, the average American. We know our wages haven't kept up with real inflation, but up till now we had a home that was going up in value. Therefore, we had equity in a home. It worked as a savings account, and we didn't feel as poor. But then in 2007, 8, and 9, when the housing market fell apart and our equity evaporated, we realized how far behind the 8 ball that we were. And many people use that equity to finance spending. So getting back to your initial question, we've been in a depression. We just don't want to admit it to ourselves, and we continue to borrow more money to try and gloss it over. We're going to do that by August 2nd by raising the debt ceiling again. Does anybody have any doubt that that's going to happen?
Well, I don't know about doubt, but there's always that little flurry of hope.
Yeah, and I would like to see it too, but Brent, all you have to do is look at the bond market and look at the 10-year Treasury yielding 3%. That's a pretty good indication that nobody's concerned about interest rates going up. So the point is that we can continue to deceive ourselves, and that's fine. But getting back to the first question you asked me, it's going to have an effect on our families because we are raising children and our children's children, and they're going to be faced with a tsunami of debt and worthless paper that they're going to have to deal with and try and dig their way out of it. It's going to be near impossible. And that's why I've written these books, to try and show the American people that we could have avoided this. I wrote a white paper entitled The Uses of Inflation. I sent it to every single congressman, every single senator, every single cabinet secretary. Do you think I got one return mail that said, thank you, you bring up some valid points? No, we continue to hide our heads in the sand, and we don't want to deal with it. And until we get leaders that will deal with it, we're on a collision course with destiny.
Well, I think it even goes more basic than that. Until we are willing to look at changing our economic structure from one that requires people to be in debt for the economy to be healthy, until we're willing to look at that, I don't think any changes in those people in office will make any difference.
I agree. And look, we have to understand what a central bank concept is. A central bank's concept is to increase the money supply when an economy is expanding, because you have to in order to grow an economy, and then subsequently contract the money supply if the economy starts contracting. Well, what's happened every time the economy's contracted? We've used Keynesian economics, printed money or borrowed money to supposedly prime pump our way out of it, and we make things worse. Think about it in real common sense, simple terms, Brett. Let's say you and I decided to start a money system, and we produced $1,000. And that's all we ever produced was $1,000. And we lent it out at 5% interest. So now a person owes us $1,000 principal and $50 in interest. Well, if we never printed any more money, how in the world could they pay us back? There isn't $1,050 to pay us back. And that's where the problem is. we create money through the Federal Reserve that we lend to ourselves and charge ourselves interest on it. So that's why all economists know we have to have a certain amount of inflation every year in our system just to keep it running.
Now, hang on. There is an answer, however. Everybody who, and by the way, what you just said is part of the Federal Reserve portion of the seminar that I conduct. So it's almost exactly the same example that I give. However, I take it a step further, which is there is an answer to the question. How do you get the $50 if the $50 was not put into circulation? Answer, you take it out in property.
And sure, or real substance, for example. That's why we had a gold standard. You actually had to take labor and a shovel, go dig it out of the ground. From the sweat of your brow shall you make your bread. It was all part of the concept of building something, creating something, making your labor have a value. And ever since the government came up with paper money, we have devalued man's labor. I mean, think about it, Brent, and I know I'm preaching to the choir with you, but if I go to work all week, and I work 40 hours and I get paid, say, $500 at the end of the week, yet the government can push a button and create $500 million in 2 seconds, they have just devalued my 40 hours worth of labor. And that's why I believe, if you really want to boil it down to the commonest terms, we basically are slaves that really don't have any time to argue about it because we're too busy paying the bills.
Now, just for those who don't quite get the concept, why wouldn't, a lot of people are sitting there saying, man, if I had $1 million, I'd be in seventh heaven. It may not buy as much today as it did yesterday, but that doesn't matter because if I had $1 million, I could live on easy street. And so why won't having the Federal Reserve inject large quantities of cash into the economy solve our financial troubles?
Because whenever you increase the amount of any substance, whether it be potatoes, oil, corn, or whatever, or money, it makes what's already out there worth less than value. Simple supply and demand. Increased supply, the same demand, lower prices. That's like, I hear all this talk right now, Brent, that the Fed is scared of deflation. The only thing that's deflating in our society right now is the price of homes. And that's not deflation. That's called deleveraging. People are selling homes they couldn't afford, and in some cases renting because they should have never owned a home in the first place. And it all goes back to the fact that we are trusting government to allow us to translate our labor into a tradable commodity and then promising that they'll keep that commodity valuable when, in fact, they need the essence of that commodity to keep their scheme going. And look, I'm not a conspiratorialist. I don't believe this is anything being done in smoke-filled rooms. They're very bold about it. They tell us that they're inflating. I mean, our own Federal Reserve Chairman Bernanke said he has an inflation target of 2.5% to 3%. I mean, so this is nothing secret. Now, the big question is, what do the American people do? That's why programs like this are so critical. You have to educate yourself, because if you understand the rules of the game, then you won't buy the mainstream nonsense to play by their rules and keeping yourself in a paper game. You will have real estate, you'll have gold, you'll have food. I've heard a couple commercials for food. Hey, what's going to be more valuable in a crisis than food? You got to have food, water, and air in order to sustain life, for Pete's sake.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that's why, to me, Brent, it's all about education. That's why I was a businessman. I've done very, very well in business for myself. I've taken the last 5 years of my life to do nothing but write books, which, quite frankly, I don't make a lot of money on, trying to help people get informed about how they can personally take care of themselves, because the government's not going to do it for them.
That's exactly the motivation I have for doing this show. Ron Paul, we call him the Patriot Congressman, is calling for a gold-backed currency as part of his recommendations on how to fix the U.S. economy. What would the establishment of such a currency do to the overall price of gold?
What would it do to the price of gold? Well, I don't know that it's feasible to do in the first place, and I respect Congressman Paul, but you'd have to do away with the welfare state. I mean, you have to keep in mind the reason why we came off the gold standard was in 1964 when Mr. Johnson started the war on poverty. There was no way you could keep promoting a welfare state if you stayed on a gold standard. It's impossible to do. Could it potentially have a positive impact on the price of gold? I suspect so, but I'm not sure that there'd be any value to it other than stopping the profligate spending from where it is, I'm not sure it would fix what's already out of the barn already.
Yeah, but like you said, it might be at least a plug against losing more. It might be part of a broader plan. I don't know. You said
you'd have to eliminate food stamps. You'd have to eliminate transfer payments. I mean, that's the only way we've been able to finance this, Brent, because we printed the money to pay for it.
Is there a way to create a gold-backed currency and segue away from a fiat currency? In other words, to have both in play as you move toward one and away from another, rather than simply replace one with the other.
Yes, and it's being done whether we like it or not by the IMF. I've already written extensively about this, that I believe we're going to lose our reserve currency status as in the world by 2015, and it will be replaced by a currency that's issued by the IMF. It'll be in the form of a special drawing right, an SDR, that is probably made up of a portion of yuan, a portion of yen, a portion of euro dollar, and a portion of gold. We should have done this years ago and probably had a bilateral system. We don't, and we're going to suffer the consequences. And look, I'm not doom and gloomer. I believe America's future could be rather bright, Brent, but we're going to have to go through some pain. We should have gone through the pain of 2008. This too big to fail nonsense. The big banks should have gone out of business. The companies that weren't playing by the rules should have been punished and lose their companies. Instead, we said, no, we're on the precipice. We'll go to the boogerman in the breadbasket. Well, think about it. TARP took 3 weeks to pass. Every week we were told if it doesn't pass, the markets won't open on Monday. But once they loaded it up with $85 billion worth of pork barrel spending, all of a sudden that desperate bill to keep us going was passed. It's ludicrous, and you and I both know it, Brent.
Absolutely, but they're not playing to us. See, that's the thing. You and I, are what they consider to be acceptable loss. They don't expect 100% compliance. We're acceptable loss. We fall through the cracks. They're going after the masses. And that of course is the problem, because people like you and I know better. Hey, but it doesn't affect the overall impact.
There's going to be plenty of collateral damage. You're right, Brent.
Yeah,
There's no doubt about that.
And it's unfortunate, and it's like, I think there's a line from The Patriot, the Mel Gibson movie, where he says, the innocent will die along with the rest. And unfortunately, I think that's exactly what does happen. You have said we're following the same economic playbook we used during the Great Depression, and it won't work. What was the playbook back there, and why won't it work today?
Well, it was classic Keynesian economics. Borrow and spend when times are tough to keep things going so that when times are better, you pay the money back. But people forget that Keynesian economics failed in 1929. If you look from 1929, let's do a little timeline. 1929, we had the stock market crash. By 1932, Mr. Roosevelt was elected president. 1933, he closed the banks, recalled the gold, which then gave him the ability to print 75% more money by revaluing gold from $20 to $35. By 1937, 4 years later, between 1937 and 1938, you had a complete collapse of the industrial base. We were in worse shape than we were in 1929 because now we had all this money to pay back, for Pete's sake. And what happened? We entered into the Second World War. That's what got us out of the Depression. Why? Because back then we were producers. We built things. We built tanks and cars and planes and so on and so forth. Back then we were producers and savers. Today, the people are consumers and borrowers that produce nothing. How in the world can we expect a playbook that failed in 1929 to work when we even have it worse now than we had it back then? It's crazy to think it will work, and they know it's not going to work, but it plays to the masses. Look at all the money that's gone back into the stock market. We're under recovery. The stock market was at 6,600. Today it's at 12,000. And all the experts are saying growth is back and unemployment's going to come down. Yet we don't see any evidence that that's the case. Unemployment's 9.1%. Consumer spending is down. Consumer confidence is off. Corporate spending is down. Look, we're going to go through some pain. Just that simple.
I once had occasion to read a copy of the New York Daily Mirror from August of 1944, not a library copy, one that actually, was on somebody's breakfast table. And this is after D-Day, so the Germans knew they were going to lose the war by this point. And there was a quote on page 3 from Adolf Hitler to the German soldiers. And I'm telling you, I tried to put myself as an actor, I tried to put myself in the character of a German soldier in that time frame, reading that. And it was, I don't remember what he said, but it was absolutely inspiring. Okay, even though everyone today knows that by then they knew they were going to lose the war. Okay, you wouldn't know it from what he was saying. And it's the same kind of tactic, that even if the entire economy is collapsing and going down the toilet, you still tell everybody that things are going great. Because some people will buy it.
Sure, and look, hey, we are going to embark on inflation in a big way, and that's why I wrote these books about inflation. This is right out of Weimar, Germany, 1919, after the Second World War. People forget the first 2 years of Weimar, Germany were very productive. The Ruhr was running full employment, they had tremendous growth. And then 1922, prices slowly started to creep up because people got confident again. The money went into the system. And next thing you know, you had hyperinflation. And for your people that don't know, hyperinflation, by definition, is any 30 calendar days in a row where prices increase more than 50%. Well, as you know, prices were increasing 50% a day on certain times in Germany. And what did that do? That set the stage to usher in Adolf Hitler, to blame it on a group of people and saying, if we just exterminate the Jews, we'll get back to a better day. It's crazy. It doesn't work. And here's the crazy part about it. Our Constitution doesn't allow this. And yet our leaders, it irks me, Brent. When I hear to protect the Constitution.
I'm going to interrupt you right there, because on this show we don't allow people to get away with calling them our leaders. They're not our leaders. They're our public servants.
Yeah, good point. It bothers me when my public servants say, I have taken an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States, and then flagrantly violate it. I mean, it's amazing to me. And what's it going to take to turn it around? Simple. Maybe you can explain this to me, Brent. How does somebody like Chuck Schumer, or even my own Senator John McCain, continually get sent back to Congress to serve the people when they have created this mess over the last 30 years? How in the world did that happen?
Well, actually, you answered it, and you just didn't realize you answered it. You say that these people are not following the Constitution. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. That means that these people are outlaws. That means that you're dealing with people of a criminal character. And you see, we continue to think that they really care about us. They really are. But you're dealing with people literally of a criminal character. And that's how they go about doing it. And that's the whole point. You're dealing with today what 80 years ago was the mob bosses gathering together in smoke-filled rooms. Today, they're in politics.
Well, but what's amazing to me, Brent, is that the people of the state of Arizona sent John McCain back for another 6 years.
Because they don't see that you're dealing with outlaws.
That's a fair point.
Again, it's that Hitler was telling his soldiers in August of 1944, we're going to win the war. That was the gist of what he said. It's just around the corner. We're going to win the war. So basically they just keep saying what Nixon was so famous for, I am not a crook. And enough people believe them or like the way they package their message that they vote for them. And even assuming if the votes are accurate, which is a whole other issue. Okay, we only got about a minute left, but how high do you think gold and silver are going to go by the end of the year?
Oh, by the end of the year, gosh, I suspect gold will be somewhere around $1,750, and silver, I don't follow silver. Silver, in my opinion, is an industrial metal, highly speculative. Gold, on the other hand, is a monetary metal. And I'm very comfortable with $1,750 by the end of the year. And I think you're going to see more central bank buying of gold than you've ever seen in the last 5 years.
Best way for people to get in touch with you, find out about your books, and I know you have giveaways here and there that you do now and then.
Sure. If they go to crashingthedollar.com, all one word, that's where they can find out information on the book. Or if they'd like a copy of that white paper that we sent to the Senate and Congressmen, they can call 800-289-2646, 1-800-289-2646. Mention you were listening to Brent Johnson, and they'll either show you how to get it off the Internet, they'll email it to you, or they'll send it to you and mail it no cost.
And was that crashingthedollar.com?
Yeah, crashingthedollar.com.
.com. All right, so here we go. www.crashingthedollar.com. That's the website for the book. 1-800-289-2646. Ask about the white paper and mention that you heard about it on the Global Freedom Report. Craig R. Smith, thanks so much for joining us here today. The best of luck and best of fortune in your travels.
Thank you. Nice being with you, Brent.